The community room at Sunset Manor smelled like vanilla cake and disappointment. I sat at the far end of the long table, watching my grandmother Margaret blow out the candles on her 85th birthday cake while surrounded by family members who'd actually earned their invitation to be here. At least, that's how she saw it. "Make a wish, Grandma," my cousin Jessica called out, her perfectly manicured hands clapping enthusiastically. At 30, Jessica was everything our grandmother had always wanted in a granddaughter. Married to a lawyer, living in a suburban McMansion, and producing great-grandchildren on a schedule that would make a project manager weep with joy. My cousin Michael raised his champagne flute, his Rolex catching the afternoon light streaming through the retirement home's floor-to-ceiling windows. "To the most amazing grandmother in the world," he announced, his voice carrying that practiced confidence that came from 6 years of pharmaceutical sales success. I sipped my sparkling cider. Alcohol wasn't my thing, and tried to blend into the background. At 27, I was the family disappointment, the one who dropped out of business school to play with computers, the one who still lived in a tiny apartment and drove a car that was older than some of my coworkers. "Speech, speech," Aunt Carol called out, her voice slightly slurred from the champagne. She'd always been Grandma's favorite daughter-in-law, probably because she'd married into the family's most successful branch, and never let anyone forget it. Grandma Margaret stood slowly, her arthritic hands gripping the edge of the table for support. Even at 85, she commanded attention when she entered a room. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawlessly applied, and her dress probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice still strong despite her age. "It means the world to me to be surrounded by my successful, accomplished family." Her eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on Jessica's designer handbag, Michael's expensive watch, and my cousin David's perfectly pressed suit. When her gaze reached me, sitting quietly in my simple black sweater and jeans, her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm so proud of what you've all achieved," she continued. Jessica with her beautiful family and her husband's law practice. Michael with his pharmaceutical career and that lovely house in Westchester. David with his promotion to senior manager at the accounting firm. Each accomplishment was delivered like a small trophy, proof that the Taylor family genes produced winners. I waited for my turn, knowing it wouldn't come. It's wonderful to see young people who understand the value of hard work and traditional success. Grandma added, her voice taking on that subtle edge I'd learned to recognize over the years. Uncle Robert, my father's brother, cleared his throat. "What about Sophie? She's working in technology now, right?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to spread. Grandma's smile became strained, the kind of expression she wore when discussing topics she found distasteful. "Sophie," she said, my name sounding foreign in her mouth, "is still figuring things out. Playing with computers. Living like a college student well into her 20s. The words hit harder than they should have. 3 years of building something extraordinary, 3 years of 16-hour days and breakthrough innovations, 3 years of watching my bank account grow, while my grandmother assumed I was barely scraping by. She'll find her way eventually," Mom said loyally, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Even my parents didn't fully understand what I did for a living. Grandma's expression softened with what she probably thought was compassion. "Of course she will, dear. Though at her age, most people have already established themselves in proper careers. Proper careers. Like there was only one acceptable path to success. And it involved corner offices, business suits, and impressing people at cocktail parties. You'll never amount to anything," Grandma declared, looking directly at me with those sharp blue eyes that had intimidated 3 generations of Taylor family members. "Unlike your successful cousins here, You don't seem to understand what it takes to build a real life." The words landed like physical blows. Not because they were surprising. I'd heard variations of this speech for years, but because part of me had hoped that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Michael suddenly found his champagne glass fascinating. David pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages. Even they seemed to recognize that Grandma had crossed a line. "Margaret," my mother said quietly, "that's not fair." "Fair?" Grandma's voice rose slightly. "What's not fair is watching a perfectly intelligent young woman waste her potential on fantasies. Sophie could have finished business school, found a respectable job, married well. Instead, she gestured vaguely in my direction, whatever this is. I stood up slowly, setting down my sparkling cider with hands that were steadier than I felt. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I think I need some air." Before anyone could respond, I walked toward the community room's exit, my simple flats making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. Behind me, I could hear Aunt Carol trying to change the subject, asking about dessert options and whether someone should start cleaning up. I made it halfway to the door before it opened from the outside, revealing a middle-aged man in a navy suit carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of tired expression that came with managing a retirement facility. "Excuse me," he said, scanning the room full of party guests. "I'm looking for Miss Taylor." "Which one?" Uncle Robert asked. "We have several Taylors here." The man consulted his clipboard. "Sophie Taylor. I'm William Morrison, the facility director here at Sunset Manor." Every head turned toward me. I paused, one hand on the door handle, suddenly very aware that I was about to become the center of attention in ways I'd spent years avoiding. "That's me," I said quietly. William Morrison's tired expression transformed into a warm, professional smile. "Miss Taylor, I'm so sorry to interrupt your grandmother's birthday celebration, but I wanted to personally thank you for the incredibly generous donation." The room went silent. Even Grandma stopped fussing with her napkin and looked up with curious eyes. "Donation?" Jessica asked, her voice carrying a note of confusion. William nodded enthusiastically. "Ms. Taylor has been anonymously funding our entire facility for the past 2 years. The renovations, the upgraded medical equipment, the enhanced dining program, all of it has been possible because of her extraordinary generosity." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the corner ticking, marking the seconds until my carefully constructed low profile completely exploded. "I'm sorry," Grandma said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Did you say Sophie has been funding this place?" William pulled out a folder from his clipboard, clearly excited to share details about what was obviously the biggest donation in the facility's history. Not just funding it, she's transformed it. The $2.3 million she's contributed over the past 2 years has allowed us to become the premier retirement community in the tri-state area. 2.3 million. The number hung in the air like a small explosion. Michael's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Jessica's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the way her mouth fell open. David's phone clattered onto the table, forgotten. "But that's impossible," Aunt Carol stammered. "Sophie doesn't have that kind of money. She works with computers." I almost laughed. If only they knew how much money you could make working with computers when you were revolutionizing cybersecurity protocols for Fortune 500 companies. "Actually," William continued, clearly enjoying the opportunity to praise a donor, "Ms. Taylor's company, Quantum Shield Technologies, has been our most significant benefactor. Her innovations in data protection have made her one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the tech industry." Quantum Shield Technologies, the company I'd built from my tiny apartment while my family thought I was wasting my potential. The company that had just signed a $50 million contract with the Department of Defense to protect government databases from cyber attacks. Grandma sank back into her chair, her perfectly styled silver hair suddenly looking fragile against her pale face. "Sophie," she whispered, "is this true?" I looked around the room at my family's stunned faces, at the broken champagne glass on the floor, at the birthday cake that had been forgotten in the wake of revelations that changed everything they thought they knew about me. "Yes, Grandma," I said quietly. "It's true." William was still consulting his folder, clearly unaware of the emotional earthquake he just triggered. The anonymous nature of the donation was Ms. Taylor's specific request, but given today's celebration, I thought it would be appropriate to express our gratitude publicly. "Anonymous," Mom repeated faintly. "You've been doing this anonymously." "For 2 years," I confirmed. "Ever since you moved here, Grandma. I wanted to make sure you had the best possible care." The retirement home director beamed. The medical wing renovation, the gourmet kitchen upgrade, the new therapy equipment. All of it was funded through Ms. Taylor's foundation. We've been able to provide services that residents typically find only in facilities costing 3 times as much. Uncle Robert found his voice first. "Sophie, how is this possible? You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old Honda." "Because I care more about substance than appearances," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "I'd rather fund medical equipment that keeps people alive than buy a car that impresses people at traffic lights." William nodded approvingly. Ms. Taylor specifically requested that her donations go toward practical improvements rather than cosmetic upgrades. The new cardiac monitoring system has already saved 3 lives this year. Grandma was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "But your career. We thought you were struggling." "You thought I was struggling because I don't define success the way you do," I said, walking back toward the table. "I don't need a corner office or a business suit to build something meaningful." "How much?" David asked quietly. "How much is your company worth?" I hesitated. This wasn't how I'd planned for my family to find out. I'd been content to let them think I was the family disappointment while I quietly built an empire that protected critical data infrastructure for governments and corporations worldwide. Quantum Shield Technologies is currently valued at approximately $180 million, I said. Though that number changes daily depending on contract negotiations and market conditions. The number hit them like a second explosion. Jessica grabbed her husband's arm for support. Michael looked like he might need medical attention. Aunt Carol reached for the champagne bottle with shaking hands. 180 million. Grandma repeated slowly, as if testing how the words felt in her mouth. William was still enthusiastically sharing details about the facility improvements. The new memory care unit that opened last month, that was entirely funded by Ms. Taylor's foundation. We're now able to provide specialized care for residents with dementia and Alzheimer's, something that wasn't possible before her generosity. I watched my grandmother's face as she processed this information. The woman who had spent decades dismissing my potential was learning that her despised granddaughter had been secretly ensuring her comfort and safety for years. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do all this for me when I've been so?" "Because you're my grandmother," I said simply. "Because family takes care of family, even when family doesn't understand or appreciate it." The truth was more complicated than that. Yes, I'd funded the retirement home because I wanted Grandma to have the best possible care. But I'd also done it to prove something to myself. That success wasn't about earning approval from people who would never see your worth anyway. William finally seemed to sense the emotional undercurrents in the room. I'll leave you all to continue your celebration, he said tactfully. Miss Taylor, if you have a moment later, I'd love to show you the new therapy wing that your latest donation made possible. After he left, the silence stretched out like a held breath. My family sat around the birthday table, surrounded by the remnants of a celebration that had become something entirely different. Sophie, Mom said finally, why didn't you tell us? I looked around the room at faces that had spent years showing polite disinterest in my life, at people who'd never asked what I was building, because they'd already decided it wasn't worth their attention. Because you never asked, I said. You saw what you wanted to see, someone who didn't fit your definition of success. It was easier to let you think I was failing than to constantly defend my choices. Grandma stood up slowly, her arthritis forgotten as she walked around the table toward me. For a moment, I thought she might be angry, might accuse me of making her look foolish or manipulating the situation. Instead, she reached out with trembling hands and cupped my face, her blue eyes bright with tears I'd never seen before. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I was wrong about everything. The apology hit harder than any criticism ever had. 3 years of building something extraordinary while hiding from family judgment. 3 years of success measured in private achievements rather than public recognition. 3 years of proving myself to people who weren't even paying attention. You were protecting me, she continued, her voice growing stronger. All this time, you were taking care of me while I was tearing you down. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. The cardiac monitoring system, she said suddenly. William mentioned it saved 3 lives. Mrs. Patterson in room 204 had a heart attack last month, I confirmed. The new equipment detected it early enough for the paramedics to save her. Mr. Rodriguez in the memory care unit is getting specialized therapy that wasn't available before the renovation, and Mrs. Chen's diabetes management improved dramatically once you got the upgraded medical facilities. Grandma was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. You know their names. You know their stories. I visit the facility quarterly to check on the programs, I said. Not as Sophie Taylor, your granddaughter, but as a representative of the foundation. I wanted to make sure the money was being used effectively. Jessica finally found her voice. Sophie, I don't understand. If you have all this money, why do you still live in that tiny apartment? I smiled, thinking about my modest home with its high-end computer systems and fiber optic internet connection. Because I don't need a mansion to write code, Jessica. I need focus, privacy, and really good internet. My apartment has all 3. But your car, Michael protested. It's 15 years old. It's reliable, fuel efficient, and fully paid for, I replied. When you're spending 16 hours a day protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks, the last thing you want to worry about is car payments. Uncle Robert was staring at me like he was trying to solve a complex puzzle. The business school you dropped out of, was that really about following your passion? Or did you already know you could make more money in tech? Both, I admitted. I realized that traditional business education was teaching me to manage other people's innovations instead of creating my own. So I left school and started building systems that could protect data in ways no one had imagined before. David pulled out his phone again, this time to actually use it. Quantum Shield Technologies. He read from what was obviously a Google search. Founded by Sophie Taylor in 2021, specializes in next-generation cybersecurity protocols. Recent contracts with the Department of Defense, NATO, and 12 Fortune 500 companies. The information was all public record, though I'd worked hard to keep my personal profile low while building the company's reputation. NATO, Aunt Carol asked faintly. International cybersecurity, isn't just a business opportunity, I explained. It's a matter of national security. The systems I've developed help protect everything from power grids to hospital networks from cyber attacks. Grandma was still holding my face, studying me like she was memorizing features she'd never really noticed before. All this time, you were building something important, something that matters. I was building something that matters to me, I corrected gently. Just like Jessica built a family that matters to her, and Michael built a sales career that matters to him. The difference is that you understood and valued their choices. Because they were traditional, she said, the word carrying new weight. Because they looked like what I expected success to look like. I nodded. I never fit that mold, Grandma. I never wanted to. But that doesn't mean I wasn't successful. It just means I was successful in ways you couldn't see. William Morrison reappeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I wanted to let you know that Mrs. Patterson is asking if she can thank Ms. Taylor personally. The cardiac episode last month was quite serious, and she credits the new monitoring equipment with saving her life. She can thank me, I said, but not as your donor. Just as Sophie, Margaret's granddaughter who likes to visit. After William left again, my family sat in contemplative silence. The birthday cake remained unfinished on the table, the champagne glasses empty, the celebration transformed into something none of us had expected. What happens now? Mom asked quietly. I looked around the room at my family, people who'd spent years misunderstanding me, but who were finally seeing me clearly. Now we finish Grandma's birthday party. And maybe next year, you'll ask me what I'm working on instead of assuming you already know. Grandma squeezed my hands. What are you working on now? I smiled, thinking about the classified project that would revolutionize how governments protect sensitive information. I can't give you details because of security clearances, but let's just say that if someone tries to hack into critical infrastructure systems, they're going to find it much harder than they expect. My granddaughter, the cyber warrior, she said, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine pride in her voice. Jessica stood up and walked over to me, pulling me into a hug that felt different from any embrace we'd shared before. Sophie, I'm sorry. We all just assumed. I know, I said, hugging her back. It's okay. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people underestimate you until a moment they realize they were wrong. As my family began to process the revelation that their family disappointment was actually their family success story, I thought about the retirement home residents who were sleeping safely because of equipment I'd funded, the government databases that were secure because of systems I'd designed, and the grandmother who was finally seeing me for who I really was. You'll never amount to anything, she'd said just minutes ago. Now she knew that I'd already amounted to more than she'd ever imagined, not just in money, but in impact, in innovation, and in the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful while the people